Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the You'll Work From Home Wellbeing series. For those of you who have joined other sessions this week, thanks for coming back. We are running these every day this week. This was our first week, and then again next week, actually. So I'll share with you who we've got on deck for Monday. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about uncertainty and how to live and learn through it. So I know several of you, but for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Sarah Devereaux. I'll be your host today. I'm calling in from beautiful Boulder, Colorado, where it is freezing. So I am not outside. We're going to be 65 and sunny by Sunday, but we were 20 degrees and snowing last night. So I am not outside. The joy of living on the plains. I am, just a little bit of background for those of you that I don't know, I am a senior strategy manager for Google's people operations team. Basically what that means is that I am focused on kind of people and culture initiatives, and I like to say in order to help folks do the best work of their lives. So this is kind of a recent gig for me. I started it last November. My husband and I are expecting our second daughter in just about 6 weeks. And I decided that, after being in leadership at Google for an extremely long time, that I wanted a little bit of a kind of physical and mental break to be able to dig into kind of some research around the topics of people and culture. So that's been great leading up to maternity leave, and something that I kind of hope to do when I get back. But you never know at Google, things change all the time. So just a couple of prior roles, just in case you have questions about them later. So I was the head of strategic initiatives for the Google School for Leaders. I was the head of executive development for Google. So I'm happy to answer any questions about Google's leadership development kind of philosophy programs, like anything in that area. And we'll try to keep things so that we've at least got sort of like 15-ish minutes at the end for Q&A. In addition to my day job, I do facilitate a lot of leadership programs for Google, particularly on well-being and complexity, which was one reason that David and I and the folks at You'll connected, and that I've been, really excited to share this content with all of you. I also coach internally and externally, so if that's of interest, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat more about that. So I thought we'd start off just by asking a question. So for those of you who have heard me speak before, you know that questions, not answers, are kind of my favorite thing. It's kind of my jam. So I thought I would ask all of you in the chat message here, if you've got that pulled up. If you don't, sometimes it's under the little more icon down at the bottom there, and you can hit chat. Just in 2 to 3 words, what are you worried about today? So let's just take a minute to reflect on that and then type a few things in. See lots of themes here. Keeping well, keeping other people well, how long this is going to last. Going to Costco, love that. I also am anxious about that. Economy. More on health, family, employment, jobs. Yeah. So I just wanted to start there and have you notice how fast everybody came up with that. So when we are operating in uncertain environments, our worries are often quite top of mind. And it can make it hard for us to be able to move productively forward in our lives or in our learning when worry is often top of mind. So, since we're going to be talking about uncertainty today, I thought we would take just a quick minute and start off with a grounding meditation. So grounding is something that I believe very strongly in. I try to do it every morning, even if it's only for a couple of minutes. I also try to do micro grounding exercises, which I'm happy to geek out on later, throughout the day if I am finding my anxiety level go up. So if you are able to, stand up for me. And I'm going to stay seated so you can still hear me. But stand up if you're able. Don't worry about the camera angle because nobody's going to look at the camera. So you can leave that behind. And plant your feet just firmly yet comfortably on the floor. And if you're seated, do the same thing. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable, or just lower your gaze. You can turn off your camera if that's more comfortable for you. I don't want anyone falling though, so don't close your eyes if you don't feel comfortable. And then I want you to take just 3 deep breaths, reaching from your toes and traveling all the way up through the top of your head, and then back down from the top of your head through to the floor. So we're going to inhale up and exhale down. And then inhale up, just feeling the breath, and exhale down. Just one more, inhale up. And exhale down. Paying attention as you continue to breathe of how the breath feels as it's traveling through your body. Now I want you to visualize for me that you have a dinosaur tail. Yes, you heard that correctly. Dinosaur tail extending from your tailbone, one of those big ones like Brachiosaurus, extending from your tailbone down all the way to the floor. Just feel the weight of that tail, the stability. The fact that if you were to very, very slightly rock back on your heels, the support that that tail provides you. And I want you to direct your attention to your feet and think about your feet flattening and widening, almost like a hobbit, providing more stability if you were to rock a little bit to one side or the other, to go a bit forward and back. That tail and feet together are providing you with a heightened level of stability. Just kind of play around with that for a minute. If you're standing, just kind of move back and forth, ever so slightly. And then from your feet, I want you to envision roots that are extending down into the earth, helping you to ground in place. And zoom out just a little bit and notice other roots that are extending from other feet, reaching into the earth, intertwining together, connecting with our fellow humans, supporting each other, regardless of distance. Just be there in that moment and take in the fact that we are not alone. Take a couple more deep breaths. Inhale up. Exhale down through the roots, breathing life and connection into each other. And one more. Inhale up. And exhale down. Okay. So when you're ready, open your eyes. Take a seat if you're standing. Move your neck around. Shake it off. Okay. So with that as our grounding, let's talk a little bit about uncertainty. So uncertainty is a difficult thing for humans to deal with. We're pretty universally bad at it. We are creatures of habit, comforted by routine and predictability, and we like to feel like we're in control, like we understand how things will play out in any given situation and how we can influence that situation to get, whatever it is we're looking for. But there are situations where we don't have control and there's no way to get it. And then what do? There are situations where there are no right answers and there's no way to find them. What feelings does this bring up in us when we just aren't sure of anything? And how do we react to those emotions? So I think it's pretty safe to assert here that we are in an unprecedented time. So yes, there have been pandemics before. Yes, more people have died due to single events at different points in history. But this is really different. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is that our world is more connected and more complex than ever before. Solutions are harder to grasp and unintended consequences are just everywhere. The complexity that we are experiencing right now, the unintended consequences that are abounding, are penetrating literally every aspect of our lives. They're destabilizing us on almost every front. And that can feel really paralyzing. Understanding what complexity is and how we can operate within it can really help us to continue to move forward, to live, to learn, even when we don't fully understand what's happening around us. So to start off, what is complexity? I want to talk about that just generally for a minute. So complexity is one of the domains in what we call the unpredictable world. It's a state where kind of best practices, deep subject matter expertise, proven approaches, they just don't work. And actually they can make things worse. A helpful model that we use quite a bit at Google and that I've come to love now that I know how to pronounce it is Cynefin. So it's spelled Cynefin. And it's a model that helps us to understand the relationship between the predictable and the unpredictable world. So I won't spend a ton of time on this. If this is interesting to you, I would highly recommend that you check it out. There are several books that have been written about Cynefin to help us understand complexity. And it's a great starting point if complexity is new for you. So essentially, the way that the model is set up, it helps us to kind of see the different domains, like I said, within the predictable and unpredictable world. So you've got the simple domain. This is the place where best practices live. So places where, oh, and I'm being asked to spell Cynefin in the chat. I'm going to do that really quick. Looks like Cynefin. It's not, it's Cynefin. So the simple domain is where best practices live. It's where, like, okay, here's the problem, here's the best practice, they go together and they work. They're still relevant. Cool. We can move forward. The complicated domain is where we have good practice. So this is where there's probably a good way of doing it. There's not just one way of doing it. There are a few different ways of doing it. You can mix and match them a little bit, but there's generally a way, to move forward that will work. It's just complicated. Now, the complex domain is where we have what we call emergent practice. And emergent practice is really where you're playing with it. The best practice doesn't work. There's really no good practice to kind of help you. And you need to run a bunch of safe to fail experiments, so to speak, and nudge the system forward incrementally in order to help you understand what works, what doesn't, in order in getting us not to a solution, but moving in a particular direction. So in complexity, there are no right answers. There's just good guesses that help us to understand how we can make progress. Now, then there's also chaos, which I won't talk too much about. Essentially, that's where there's really not a whole lot of way to make progress. It's where they talk about novel practice. And chaos, really what you're trying to do in chaos is to just get anywhere else. The likelihood is that you're going to get into, complexity, maybe complicated, you might skip it. But also none of these domains are, there isn't a problem, I guess, that is just a complex problem. You're usually moving between all four of these, or at least three of them, as the problem is evolving. So the borders are penetrable, I guess. Okay, so complexity is really hard. As I mentioned before, humans are creatures of habit. We tend to take the same approach over and over again because it's worked. But we're also creatures of bias. And this is where it gets really dangerous. We tend to ignore evidence that a tried and true approach isn't working anymore, especially if that evidence shows up slowly over time. So we keep doing what we've always done. We apply complicated solutions to complex problems, or worse, we apply obvious solutions to complex problems. And what happens is as the complexity grows, the consequences of kind of applying those complicated or obvious solutions increases. So if we try to use predictable world approaches in the unpredictable world, we become unproductive, frustrated, and stuck. Now, people who feel responsibility for outcomes tend to have the most difficulty in kind of a complex environment. So leaders, for instance, they often feel like they have to know all the answers and they always have to make the right decision. And then when there's not a right answer and there's not a correct decision to be made, and you have to say, I don't know, leaders often report feeling really anxious, like they're obligated, and even feeling guilty. And these feelings, if not recognized and addressed, can significantly impact their ability to make sound decisions. So they may act too rashly, they may delay decision-making past the point of no return, which are both reactions that can produce devastating results. So one result of being in complexity that I wanted to share with and talk to you guys about is overthinking. So I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have had moments of overthinking. I had a moment of overthinking last night. It's this pesky habit that a lot of us have to overanalyze a problem in the hopes that if we obsessively keep thinking about it, that we'll find a way to solve it. We think it's problem solving, but it's actually not. Studies show that overthinking can actually lead us further away from a viable solution versus closer to it. And it's also got a truly unproductive cousin, scenario building. So quick example of scenario building. So let's say that I am covering for a colleague at work, and she reports into a different boss than I do. And I've never worked with this person before. And I'm working with her boss while she's out on vacation for a couple of weeks on a project. And her boss sends me this email that's very short, very, very brief email with very little context. And basically, I look into it, I kind of read it between the lines, right? And I see sarcasm and then I potentially disappointment. And I'm like, wait a second, like, what did I do? We've only been working together for a couple of days. What's going on? It's Friday afternoon. We don't have time to get together to talk about it. And so I start thinking about it and I start overanalyzing. I'm like, okay, well, what about the last email he sent? Maybe I'll look at that. What about that meeting that we were in? Let me take a look at those notes and see if there's anything in there. And then I drive home and I start thinking, oh my God, what if he's really disappointed and he tells my boss, about how I'm not doing a good job covering, and then I get a bad performance review. It's really close to performance review time. What if I get 2 bad performance reviews? What if I lose my job? I don't think my husband and I can support our household on only one income. We're going to have to move. We're going to have to sell I have to call my parents and make sure that we can move in with them so that my children aren't homeless. So you've gone from like, okay, here's this like really quick, less than a sentence, email that you've read way too far into. And you've gone all the way from that to, I'm going to end up homeless on the street and I have to do something about it as soon as I get out of the garage. So scenario building. So overthinking doesn't tend to lead to anything terribly productive. And why does it, and it tends to show up a lot in complexity. So it shows up when we're feeling anxious or uncertain. And these are hallmark emotions that are associated with the unpredictable world. So because it feels like we're doing something productive when we're overthinking, even though we're actually making ourselves less productive and more anxious, it's a super tempting strategy to help us cope when we're in a situation when there are no clear answers. So think about another just quick example here. Think about the increase in news consumption since the coronavirus crisis started. People don't know what to do. They don't know what might happen next. They're anxious and uncertain, so they overthink it. They obsessively read more and more news stories to try to better understand the situation so that they can try to get some sense of control over it. But all they actually do is raise their anxiety level and decrease their level of control. So anxiety, and from a biological standpoint, like anxiety and uncertainty trigger the fear centers in our brain. And when we're afraid, we have less capacity to think logically and make decisions. Anxiety is also highly contagious. When your anxiety levels go up, so does the anxiety of the people around you. And in this age of social media and just a unlimited amount of ways to share information, this is particularly dangerous because it allows us to spread anxiety and thus fear at scale. So this all sounds pretty bad. So what do we do when we find ourselves kind of in this unpredictable world, and maybe we're getting a little anxious and maybe we're starting to overthink and get a little obsessive about finding an answer or moving forward in some way? What do we do about it? There's lots of things, but the one that I wanted to kind of focus in on today with you all is a technique that I feel has a really big payoff. It's pretty simple. And has to do with self-awareness and self-regulation. So the next time you notice that you're doing a little obsessive overthinking, and noticing, can be one of the hardest steps to take. So even if you're not sure, right? Like, oh, I might be overthinking right now, but maybe I'm not. So I'm not gonna do this. If you have just like an inkling, that you might be overthinking something, you can give this a shot. So again, questions. and the power of questions. So just stop yourself. Okay, wait a minute. Like, quick email to homelessness. Okay, I might be overthinking here. So is this really helping me right now? How am I feeling in this moment? How do I want to be feeling? Is what I'm doing helping me feel this way? And what's one thing that I could do right now to change my emotional state? And a little hint for you, in complexity, it's usually not focus on what I can control, which is a popular strategy, right? Like you kind of hear that everywhere. Well, just focus on what you can control. Well, in complexity, it is pretty common for you not to be able to control anything. You might try a couple different strategies. You might go for a walk, you could meditate, you could spend time with people you love, or the thing that I would recommend you guys give a shot is practicing acceptance. So there's a big difference between acceptance and approval. When you practice acceptance surrounding a situation, you're accepting that something is happening, whether good or bad, and you're giving yourself permission to move past it. When we don't accept things in our lives, particularly those negative things, right? Like we run the risk of allowing destructive emotions to remain with us for longer periods of time. And when emotions linger, they become moods. So resignation and resentment are two common kind of negative moods that people can fall into when they don't accept what's happening around them. And these moods can lead to things like depression or ongoing feelings of anger and even hatred. So acceptance is pretty powerful, but it can be really difficult to achieve, particularly when you're in extreme circumstances like the one we're encountering right now as a global community. If you feel the higher the threat level, the harder it is for you to accept what's happening. Because again, that anxiety taps into the fear responses in our brains. So one technique that I really like for achieving acceptance is the use of declarations. So once you know what you need to accept, you can create a declaration to help you really embody that acceptance. So I'll give you a quick example from my life. So I'm excited to bring our second child into the world in May, and I accept the fact that my husband may not be able to be at the hospital with us due to coronavirus. But I know we have a lifetime of love and joy to look forward to together. Now, I don't agree, just personally, with the decision that some hospital systems have made to deny women a support person and to make them go through labor and delivery and everything that happens in those few days afterwards until you go home by themselves. I feel pretty strongly that there is a lot of research and documentation, both by the WHO and the CDC and all kinds of other health organizations, that show that that is detrimental to women's health. And so we are sacrificing something that we know is bad for people's health because of something that we fear and that we don't know, which is the spread and impact of people without symptoms. And I understand, like, it's a super complex, super difficult, decision to make that I happen to not agree with. But I don't have any control over it. So I can either obsess about it, which is what I started doing about 3 weeks ago, where I was reading court orders, and my dad's a journalist, and I was asking him to look up court orders that were difficult to find publicly, like about women who had tried to sue over this in New York City, because I was so scared that it was going to come to Boulder. And then I remembered that I probably can't do anything about this. And when you can't do anything about something that you're scared of, then trying to practice acceptance is probably the best course of action. So I started saying this declaration 4 times a day, which is something that a leadership coach of mine taught me last year, which she was amazing. 4 times a day, 4 times, 3 times per day. And I would say it those 4 times, right, in 4 different somatic positions. And I know some of you may have been on the call yesterday where Zanette, kind of touched on cymatics. We're going to have more on that next week. But this really helps to help to get to a point where you can really believe in what you're saying. Because in order to actually accept something, you have to believe it. So I'll tell you the thing that I really love about incorporating cymatics. So it helps you to really summon up kind of in the moment your acceptance of a situation, no matter kind of what state you might be in. So I happen to, kind of believe that our bodies are reflections of our emotional states. And by paying attention to that connection between our bodies and our emotions, we can change our bodies in order to facilitate a change in our emotions, which can be really powerful. So if you've got something that's troubling you, perhaps some of the things that we talked about at the beginning of the call, that you're having trouble accepting the situation around it, and maybe you're doing a little overthinking, or maybe it's just, it's just taking up too much of your mental and emotional energy. You might want to try an acceptance practice. So thinking of something that is kind of gnawing at you lately that you may need to let go of, and crafting a declaration that helps you to let go of it. And when I first put that declaration together, I was like, oh, but I don't accept it. Like, and that's kind of the hallmark of a great declaration. You look at it the first time and go, no, like, I don't want to say that because I don't agree with it. But it reflects that ideal kind of future state of acceptance in a way that does make you really uncomfortable until you get to a point where you can actually believe it. Okay, so with that, before we move into a little bit of time for questions, I want to do one more meditation with you guys. So I want to talk just a little bit about gratitude. I'm sure that many of you have heard of this before, that gratitude is a proven way to increase our happiness. When you are making expressions of gratitude a regular practice, it increases your happiness even more. So I want to do just a quick gratitude exercise. So no standing up this time. So just get comfortable in your chair again. Close your eyes for me. Make sure your palms are nice and comfy. Sometimes I like mine facing down. Sometimes I like them facing up. You can gently intertwine your pinkies maybe. Let your hands touch or keep them separate. Take a couple deep breaths. I want you to think of someone who you're grateful for in your life. Visualize that person in your mind's eye. And think about the reason that you're grateful for them. What were the circumstances? Were there specific moments that you can point to? Did you ever tell them how grateful you were? What other emotions are you experiencing in thinking about this individual? Take a few more deep breaths, holding that image in your mind. holding those emotions. Holding your gratitude. And when you're ready, open your eyes, just a quick one. And if you happen to have a pencil and paper handy, or you can use your computer as well, I want you to just take a minute and jot down just a couple of words or key phrases that kind of describe the gratitude that you felt towards this person. So let's just take a minute or so, just a couple of quick shorthand notes. Okay, now comes the fun part. So if you haven't actually expressed to this person before your gratitude, or even if you have, never hurts to say thank you more than once. Consider taking some time, maybe later today, to write them a letter. And if you want to take it up a notch, send them the letter. And if you want to take it up 2 notches, call them and read them the letter out loud, or outside. You could also go outside. So it's amazing how good you'll feel in doing this, and how good you will make someone else feel. The amount of folks who we run this exercise at Google in our women's resilience program. And the women who call the people that they write about, it's amazing. Like, or do a video and send it to that, like the tears, and like, it's just incredible. Everybody's has this beautiful, like, cathartic moment of joy. Like, so I highly recommend it. I've done it several times. Once with my 94-year-old grandfather. And I think I was raised with him, and I've never seen him cry except for doing this. So it's a great exercise. And honestly, especially at a time like this, all of us can use a little reminder of how much we're appreciated and loved. And by showing that appreciation and love for others, we feel it ourselves. So with that, I would love to thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate each of you. So thank you for joining. We are going to be here every day next week at 1 o'clock Pacific time with a different program, and we would love to see you all again. So Monday, we have Jennifer Vagley. She is let me make sure I get this right, yoga and meditation teacher and employee experience designer at Procter & Gamble. And she's going to be talking about managing your energy while working from home through somatic movement. So if that tiny little teaser I gave you about Cymatics sounded interesting, Jennifer's going to talk about that a little bit more on Monday. So with that, I will stop talking. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to either unmute or type them in the chat, whatever you would like. Okay, so a couple of questions. So, the 3 times a day exercise. So this is the declaration. So basically you come up with a statement that kind of highlights that future ideal state of acceptance. And you say it you can, if you want, in different somatic dispositions. So the 4 somatic dispositions that I kind of subscribe to are flexibility, openness, resolution. flexibility, openness, resolution, and stability. And the meditation that we did at the beginning of today's session is a stability meditation. So there's lots of different somatic, kind of dispositions and practices out there. So you don't have to do those. Like there's also archetypes where like you're the king or you're the lover or whatever. And those map to different, somatic positions. But I highly recommend it. When I first started doing Cymatics, I thought it was super hokey. And honestly, I've never had larger emotional shifts than when I am practicing somatic movement. So pretty powerful stuff. Cool. Oh,
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, any other questions? Great. Well, as I said, always happy to chat. I am headed out on maternity leave in 14 minutes, but I will still be on LinkedIn for the next, kind of month or so before the baby arrives. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to send me a note. I always love chatting with people. And thank you, David, and the YOL team for having me. This has been really fun. It was great to think through all of this. And yeah, especially at this time, this really brought me a lot of joy. So very grateful for you all as well. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks again.